With so much love to Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, psychiatrist who introduced the 5 stages of grief in 1969. Point of all that is that death has its own way of perpetuating continuity despite the bodies it carries away with it. So if you have looked at the Kubler-Ross 5 stages of grief model and thought that it genuinely sucks, then you and me have something in common. I began taking apart the Kubler-Ross model back in 2017, my grad school days specifically. Fight on. The textbook I was using was throwing shade at the 5 stages of grief by mentioning that the stages don't flow in a smooth and organized order. I'm sure anyone alive can attest that emotions, no matter how great or difficult, don't flow in a smooth, steady, and contained flow. The model also doesn't tell you how long the stages last, how much time it takes transitioning between the stages, and it doesn't specify when the grief will go away, if ever. Another thing to consider is the point of view. Echoing the creator of the model, Miss Elizabeth Kubler-Ross herself, was giving face to the grief process of a patient coming to terms with the inevitable. The emphasis was the journey of a patient who is conscientious that life is withering and their perspective depending on what part of the death process they were in. This does not reflect the experience of surviving family and friends. So, the grief experiences, the emotional turmoil of actively dying patients and their loved ones is felt differently but equally. Because in the end, only one remains, knowing that both knew the extent and impact of living, of loving, of being in this body, of sharing pizza together. As a former healthcare hero, I completely skipped denial, and though I was shell-shocked, I remained completely cognizant of what was happening and why. So I also ate away at bargaining. That was not a stage I went through. Our next stage is isolation. The disease of 2020 contributed to that, but this one I hit, and I hit it hard. It's the reason I didn't post on social media for 8 months straight. In that time, I wasn't sure if I'd ever participate in actively posting like I used to, or just turn my back on social media altogether. It's just that Missy couldn't read. She didn't even have opposable thumbs. Anything I would have posted on social media anyway would have been downplayed, and not just because my loss was an aging dog, but consider if I were a young widow, you can bet that I would have been told to keep my head up because I'm young and can have someone else's babies, so to thank my lucky stars that I'm young, or some crap like that that people reach for because they're uncomfortable and don't know how to sit with grief. So out of respect and love for Missy and how badly that loss wounded me, I went radio silent and pitch black on social media for 8 months straight. The next time I posted on Instagram, I really only did it to sound off that I started this channel in Missy's legacy. Other than that, the platform just doesn't attract my attention. A friend asked me, "What are your thoughts on social media?" I said, "It's a fun place to visit, but I don't live there." Our next and final stage is adjustment. Oh, yeah, so much adjusting and readjusting. See also, I got fired a month ago. Before that, I transitioned from remote work to inpatient work. Before that, I was remotely working on one team while covering a different team and expected to cycle back to an overall ongoing team. Work couldn't use me enough. I'm still exhausted, and I thought 4 weeks after getting fired, I'd be running up mountains by now. A parked car has more energy than I do at this time. So, I hope to readjust to the healthy routine I had going for me when I was still working remotely and had more time to nurse the still gashing grief wound. So out of the 5 stages, I really only hit about 3-ish of them. And mind you, it's still a very much 100% all-consuming experience. Though I can echo Rick Sanchez's wabba-labba-dub-dub sentiment, I'm in great pain, and yet I have to own up to my privilege as a former, quote, healthcare hero, end quote. I know there's a point where the body shows that it just can't take anymore. Working in a healthcare setting teaches you that there are certain lines you just can't cross, either because time beat you or no family wants to talk about comfort-based care over cure-based care for a loved one they're otherwise expecting back home. Though it hurt me to let Missy go, I weighed her end-of-life options over my aching heart because I built up competence in health and wellness. The experiences and conversations I had with families left me wishing I could yell the denial out of some people. I knew it was wrong. I knew they were hurt. But I knew that the patient we were discussing was in much worse shape. Failure to thrive, as the doctors say. I was just some provider on the clock, but nonetheless, these moments were doubly painful while I was working with the families because, for one, as part of the med team, we couldn't save every patient despite trying everything possible to save all. Families at large live very complex lives, so the concept of health and its relationship to lifestyle is not widespread, well understood, or practiced. This is evident the second healthcare staff has questions for the patient and their family. I used to ask people from a scale of 1 to 10, what is your appetite like as of lately? Pretty basic question for some, very confusing and hard to keep up with for others. I hope this is conveying that perspectives vary largely, which is what makes going through the 5 stages of grief very different depending on who is going through it and their perspective. No 2 experiences can ever be the same, even if the people know and deeply love each other. So the model is essentially what to expect when you're at the end of life, more or less. The 5 stages of grief are also not set in stone, as said by Kubler-Ross, the creator herself. So I wanted to highlight that the grief model may be completely relevant to your experience, or maybe it's only partially relevant, and that's completely okay. In a previous video, I mentioned that following the loss, I am mostly angry. My life took a 180 after Mess passed on, but less than 2 months before that, she was with me on another 180 experience. The rage was insurmountable and left me with many questions. A good friend referred to me, and I quote, as a scientific and fiery Latina, end quote. So my mind juggles critical thinking with rage at my worst. I can crank out a punch or an idea at any given moment at my worst. When I saw Professor Hulk on the big screen, it felt like looking at a mirror. It's the closest of what I have to a description of what it feels like to have rage, brilliance, and a pack of people who won't leave you alone. I hope I'm not presenting my rage as a charming part of myself, but I'm bringing it up because the other side of rage is sorrow. When I feel sorrow, it leaves me with questions, but the questions I ask aren't those anyone can logically answer because they're aimed at illogical people. So for a moment, I become perplexed. And in one of these moments, I scrambled for a poem that I first read back in 2019. It says, be patient toward all that is unsolved in your heart and love the questions themselves. like locked rooms and like books that are now written in a very foreign tongue. Do not now seek the answers which cannot be given, because you would not be able to live them. And the point is to live everything. Live the questions now. Perhaps you will then gradually, without noticing it, live along some distant day into the answer. Rainer Maria Rilke. I had only read that poem once in 2019. I saw it again in 2021, and it was an entirely different experience after living everything I've been through up until this point. So just wanted to quickly share a perspective from a colleague who was with me when I first read this poem. He mentioned all change requires something to be given up, so there's a loss because something is different. So there's a sense of grief after a loss, change, whatever you want to call it. With that said, thank you so much. Good looking out. I'll be back with more content soon. Missy, thank you so much for the inspiration. I love you. And if you have any questions, feel free to drop them on the comment box below. Happy to help in any way I can. Oh yeah, and if this video served you, please hit the like button. Let the YouTube algorithm know that this stuff is awesome.